when ready. I'd like to introduce Stefan from England, who takes LDN for multiple sclerosis. Good morning, Stefan.
Good morning, Linda.
Could you tell me when you were diagnosed with MS?
I was officially diagnosed in February of 2004, although I'd been experiencing the symptoms of MS and just didn't know what it was, for about 4 years before that.
And what symptoms were you experiencing at that time?
Well, I think before to put into perspective, I've always been a very healthy, fit man. I've done a lot of what would be considered to be extreme sports. I've done nearly 1,000 skydives. I was a hang glider pilot, a scuba diver, a mountain biker, a rock climber, and a pilot. And being so fit and active all the time, and then during this 4 years, the late 90s and into the early parts of this century, I started to experience weakness. I'd be in the gym and I would find that I had very little stamina, and I started to notice that my left side primarily was becoming. Sometimes it felt like my left leg wasn't mine. I would start to walk, and I wasn't sure whether my left leg was actually moving, and I would stumble and fall. So it was confused, and I went to the doctors, and it's a strange thing. I mean, at that time, I didn't really have any great understanding about MS and the reasons why MS happens. So when I went to the doctor, and the doctor says, okay, we'll do a blood test. And he did just a CBC, a complete blood count, and then said, there's nothing wrong with you. Now, at that time, I just took his word for being correct. Now, the reality is that when a blood test is done, you can't see MS from a blood test. You can see markers that indicate something is wrong, and then that associated with other things can actually give you a greater understanding of what's happening. But at the time, the doctor says, no, you're okay. So I just presumed I was okay. And then in 2002, I met through some friends a woman. I moved to Colorado, and I got married and basically lived in this incredible state of Colorado, which is mind-blowing. And I was doing exercise like mountain biking, but I found that when I was pedaling up a hill, and normally what I would have done is just stand up on the pedals and really power up, I would get very weak, and it just became confusing to me because I just thought, well, maybe it's because I'm getting older. At that time, I was 46, and I was just finding it very strange. I couldn't, it was the male ego thing, so I'm big, tough, and I can do anything. And I just couldn't understand why I was getting weak. It was a bit strange. So it just, I was more confused than anything because the medical professionals who I saw just dismissed my claims of weakness and instability and bad coordination as just, oh, well, you're getting older, Mr. Cairns, don't worry about it. So that was just a frustrating thing for me.
Mm-hmm. So what happened at diagnosis?
Well, what happened was, again, in February, I became a little sick in that I fell over. I used to get up very early in the morning because I worked for a company. I was in a sales role. I sold asset management tool tracking software, and I would be in the office at 6 o'clock in the morning because I worked with the East Coast, and Colorado is in mountain time. Then there's Pacific, then mountain, then central, then eastern. And I worked with the eastern time zones, so they were 2 hours ahead of me, and so I would get into the office at 6 and work with them at 8. Well, I got up and I was actually just in the bathroom and I was having a shave, and all of a sudden the mirror in front of me appeared to be being moved radically from in front of me to lower right. It was just as if it was moving all the time. So I gripped hold of the sink because I was becoming very confused and disoriented, and I ended up collapsing on the floor. And my wife had 2 cats, and one of the cats, a very clever little cat called Einstein, was meowing like this all the time. And Donna got up and she came to me and she said, Einstein, what's the matter? And she turned around and looked in the bathroom and I was laying on the floor. And she said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm getting ready to go home to work. And she said, no, you're not. She helped me stand up and put me back into bed. Now, I'm not the sort of person who sleeps a lot. I'm a very early riser, but I ended up sleeping for another 3 hours or so. And then she took me to hospital, and or took me to the doctor's first. The doctor basically was very confused, but said, I've got an idea of what this could be, but I want you to go to hospital. So they sent me to hospital, and they put me in a ward, and over the course of 3 days, they did MRI, CAT scan, EEG, ultrasound, lumbar puncture, and, they did all these tests. And eventually the doctor, a very interesting neurologist from New York, came to me and said, there's no way of breaking this to you gently, Mr. Cairns, but you've got multiple sclerosis. And I said, well, I'll deal with it. He said, well, I'm sorry, you can't deal with it. It's an incurable disease, and if you don't get onto medication in 2 weeks, if you don't get into medication, you'll be in a wheelchair in 6 months. And I refused. I didn't want to have MS on my records, because obviously in America you pay for your health insurance. My health insurance at the time was $90 a month. It would have gone up to around $600 a month, which I just couldn't afford. So I said, no, I'm just not going to have this on my record. And I refused to go back to hospital. And I thought I'd treat this myself. And I did lots of research, and eventually I came across a product called Xango, Xango, which is a drink made from the mangosteen fruit. And a company in Utah had created this incredible juice. Nothing in it other than the fruit of mangosteen and 7 other juices. And I started taking it, and I started to notice differences. And within a couple of weeks, I went from being a very uncoordinated person with no strength whatsoever to being able to exercise. Only a minimal amount, but I definitely noticed differences, improvements.
Mm-hmm.
So I was, very excited. And over the next, I still take Xango now, and it's kept me from being in a wheelchair, without a doubt. But shall I explain a little bit more about what I've done?
Yes, please.
Okay. So in 2007, I interviewed for a job with a company called Huggins Applied Healing. And Dr. Huggins is the world leader in dentistry and dental toxicity and the problems that are created through contamination of the blood. And I interviewed with him 3.5 hours after the interview. He said, well, Stefan, are you prepared to lose all your friends? And I said, why would you say that? He said, well, when you know what you know, you'll lose all your friends. I was confused by this a little bit, but I said, yeah, sure, because I'd read a lot about him, and I accepted the job. Then over the next several years, I'd studied with Dr. Huggins and a man called Dr. Thomas E. Levy, an incredible man, and several other leaders in this area, in the field of alternative health, complementary medicine. And I learned an awful lot about why these things actually happen. And this is something which, for every MS patient, and this is something which will help everyone. When people go through life and they have fillings, the older fillings prior to 1976, they were 52% mercury, and mercury is the most toxic, non-radioactive substance on Earth. There's proof of this. This is not just an opinion. There's absolute proof. Then there's 52% mercury, then zinc, copper, tin, and maybe 8 or 10% silver. So when the dentist says to you, it's a silver filling, it's a minimal amount of silver. It's silver in color, yes. The fact is that the combination of those dissimilar metals have all the basic requirements to be a little battery. So you have a little battery in your mouth. The battery emits a signal, either negative, positive, high or low. And they're like, if say for instance you think about the older flash bulbs in a camera. You'd take a picture, it would flash, and you'd hear this as this little battery was recharging. And that's what's happening with the batteries in the mouth. The battery emits the signal. If you think about it, the nearest organ to your mouth is your brain, and the signals would go up into the brain. Around the brain there's a fluid. When it actually interacts, the electrical signal interacts with this fluid, it creates edema, a swelling. So when you have an MRI and they say, okay, well, what's happening is that your immune system is attacking itself, it's confused, and it's breaking down the myelin sheath, the insulating tape around the brain and nerves. That's what they tell you. So you just say, okay, fair enough, I've got this sclerosis or scarring, which is what it is. What it really is that it's creating this interaction between the electrical signal and the fluids around the brain, and it's creating this edema or swelling. So what's showing up is swelling, not scarring because of your immune system attacking itself. Now, let me think, it was 2005, Dr. Huggins was giving an interview to 250 medical professionals, and he explained this, amongst other things, but he explained it. And when he was leaving, he was confronted by several doctors, as you can imagine. One of the doctors said that he was the inventor of the MRI. He said, Dr. Huggins, I'd like to tell you you're wrong, but I don't think I can. Now, if the inventor of the MRI actually acknowledges that this is really what's happening, then I think that maybe that's true. But if you think about it, MRI scanners are costing around $500,000, maybe £350,000. There's thousands of them around the world. The last thing any of the medical authorities and hospitals want to do is to acknowledge the fact that they bought a piece of equipment which is not showing the truth. They don't want to acknowledge this. It's a frustrating thing, but this is really what's happening. Okay. Now, with dentistry, again, this is another thing which is a major influencing factor over people getting sick, and especially with MS. Again, a root canal is probably the worst thing that a woman, it's bad for a man, but it's probably the worst thing for a woman as well. When statistically 94% of all women that have breast cancer or died of breast cancer had a root canal. If it was a 10% or 5%, you could say, well, it was just a coincidence, but 94% is a little bit more conclusive evidence. So it's a reason why there's very strong reasons for women primarily to not have root canals. And again, this information is documented in great depth with people like Dr. Huggins and George Meinig. There's an awful lot of very, very highly qualified medical professionals who've seen this and have documented it. But again, the powers that be will not say that they will do anything about it. Going back to the LDN, about 18 months ago, a friend of mine or a lady who became, her and her husband became a friend of mine through my work with Dr. Huggins. She'd actually made an inquiry. I'd called her, we talked, and then she'd explained about her MS and also explained about the use of LDN. She recently got married, or she was obviously engaged at the time, but she recently got married, and she walked beautifully into the church and out, and she looks incredible. She has very, very few symptoms of MS now. I mean, sometimes she gets a little bit weak, but there isn't any of the spasms or spasticity that is common with MS patients. Her vision is perfect. perfect bladder control. She has no real symptoms at all, and that's just from using LDN. Now, she told me about it, and I did, again, a little bit of research. I actually had a chance of taking LDN in capsule form, but I did it for a month, and I didn't stop it voluntarily. It was simply because I couldn't have the LDN put together from a compounding pharmacy. I had it originally taken when I was in Virginia, and then I went back to Colorado, and unfortunately my compounding chemist that I was talking to refused to do it. So I did it for a month and then stopped. And then I recently come back to England because I'd lost my job because of MS. It was just a case of Dr. Huggins didn't feel comfortable about me getting sick. And I think what I did over the course of the years, he's very much an egotistical man. And the fact that all of the other medical professionals were wanting to talk to me because they didn't have to pay to have the questions answered, and they knew they would get a very credible answer as well. His ego was a little bit sort of too dominant, so and he wanted to change direction in his business. So I was let go in May of last year, 2011. So I came back to England at the end of last year because I had become very weak and I lived on my own, and I was getting very concerned because I was falling over and I had no means of looking after myself. I couldn't work. So my family brought me back to England, and I've been very, very fortunate. I'm staying with my lovely sister who's been looking after me. I'd been to see a doctor in the town, or the next town I live in is called Worksop. And I'd been to see my doctor, a very open-minded doctor, because most doctors are not necessarily open-minded to things which are a little bit alternative. And I asked her about LDN, and she told me that to get LDN, it would be, even though she believed in it, it would cost about £1,500 a month. I said, I'll leave that. Then I was talking to my friend that I mentioned earlier, and she lives about 100 miles away. I was talking to her, and she told me how to get it. And she told me about EMED. So I registered with EMED, registered, and my interest in LDN. And then they sent it. I proved to them. I have sent a letter proving my MS from the neurologist, the hospital in Nottingham, and they then sent a prescription to Dixon's Chemist or Dixon's Pharmacy in Glasgow. So about 6 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, I had my first bottle of liquid LDN. I initially took 1.5 grams per day and just gradually increased it, and about 4 or 5 days ago, I've been taking the 4.5 milligrams. So it's on the correct dosage now. In that time, I've actually noticed slight improvements. I mean, for me, because I'm not one of these people who says, okay, well, I'm not better now, so I'm going to stop it. I mean, I didn't get sick overnight. It took me several years for it to become so bad that I was incapacitated. So I can't possibly expect it to cure me or to make me significantly better in a week. I mean, the body is a very complex thing, and there's an awful lot of components, organs, systems in the body which are contaminated now, and it's going to take a long time before each one of those things are improved to even a minimal amount. But I'm very positive because I'm feeling I feel my stability is better. I'm able to, I do work with a cane now, and I'm finding that, like Linda said, that's, furniture walking. I just wobble from room to room, just touching the furniture or the walls. But sometimes I think, okay, well, I'll try and walk normal now. and I force myself to not touch anything and just walk. And quite often I can walk maybe say 10 paces, and then I will get a bit overconfident and trip and fall into something. But that's just a minor thing. It's just reminding me that I can't be so not to be too optimistic too soon. I know this is making a difference. I know this will make a huge difference in me because of just the different symptoms I'm noticing now. But I'm very, very confident that it will. I believe I'm going to be perfectly fine. It might take me 10 years, but I believe I will. I'm actually 57, or 57 and a bit. So it's, knowing that I've done so much in the way of physical activity, it's hard for me to say, well, okay, well, I'm getting older now, I can't do these things. But I'm not an arrogant, ignorant person, but I definitely am positive in terms of I know I will get better.
Well, thank you, Stefan, and I look forward to doing another update with you.
Well, that's my pleasure, and if there's anything that I can do to help anybody else, I would very gladly do that. Just a matter of interest. I've written a small ebook, and I have a website called Rather Be Healthy, www.ratherbehealthy.com. And on that site there is probably over 350 posts. Probably 50 or 60 of them are ones that I've written myself in relation to dentistry and the reasons why cavities, amalgam fillings, root canals, braces, bridges, all these different aspects of dentistry that explain how they can create other problems and exacerbate certain symptoms of MS, as well as just restricting people's lives. So, be worthwhile looking at.
Thank you.